Hi all, welcome to another episode of Saturday Architecture. And we have Nishant Deepak in Gaza with us. I was thinking one of the things just before the call started, we were discussing about how a company which is offering services to a customer, uh, what can it do in a situation where the customer is asking for a higher end technology and the services company is kind of trying to get this work done by somebody else and they are doing a certain manual work uh, and the AI is supposed to replace that manual work and the services company is trying to and they're working on a legacy system. Now the AI system which the new will be implemented will again feed into the legacy system and the services company can continue to do their work because they are living off the legacy system, correct? And the ideal thing for the customer is to move the entire solution to an AI based thing. If they do that, the services company will lose business. Now, if for the services company to survive, what is the role of an architect? Right? What does he play? Is it just a account the CEO's job, or is it an architect? I would go with the my famous thing. Anything and everything that happens in the universe, architect is responsible for it. Okay, so I'm kind of trying to look at it from that stance, which kind of means that architect needs to be aware of the technology and the business needs of the company or his stakeholders, right? His or her the architect's stakeholders, and to meet those needs, what are the capabilities that needs to be built? For those business capabilities, what are the IT capabilities that is needed? So the architect needs to think ahead in understanding of the stakeholder needs. And so in this case specifically, if we look at it, the architect needs to kind of uh, ideally some architect in that company should have anticipated AI or an RPA will come and take away the job that I'm doing. Okay, so if somebody is doing a transcription, basic level of debugging, data cleaning kind of a work, the architect in that team should have anticipated this at least 5 years ago. Ideally, 10 years ago, a good architect could have, but at least 5 years ago, an architect should have raised the flag and prepared a plan for it. They are ready for it now. Unfortunately, this team that didn't happen. Now the team is there. AI is kind of matured. It's getting mainstream, and they are still trying to hold their fort of this. Now it's just a matter of time before that wall is breached, right? Where the AI thing will kind of, and then they will be completely helpless. It's like a tsunami. So today it's like some water of 3 feet coming and hitting the shores, right? 3 years down the line, that will develop into a tsunami. They cannot protect it anymore. It will just wash them over, right? Today, at least their house is going off. They can do some mending like that, which means again, it is a clear failure of architecture. Looks like I'm going to call this an architecture failure series from now on. Whenever I'm going, so last time what I published was an architecture failure. Looks like this. So it's a classical
Yeah.
architecture failure, right? The architect didn't anticipate the need of the services company, right? And now somebody can say, you know what, I told the management, they didn't listen to me. You didn't tell it in a way that convinced them. Again, failure of architecture, your
I
inability
think
to
I
influence.
think when this should be a sort of a statutory
So,
requirement for architects to produce architecture with an expiry date. Right? It's like medicine, right? This will work only for X amount of years. Okay. After that, we have to reevaluate, right?
That is
Because
true. I
because
I
I
completely
think
agree.
it is unrealistic to expect people to have a 5 year, 10 year vision, but they can at least expect the lifespan of what they created, right? So that is something which can be expected of an architect. Instead of saying you should know everything for the future, which probably may be unrealistic for a lot of people, but at least they can say, okay, this will last maybe 1 year, 2 years, because the next trend of technologies or the improvements, they will definitely require this to be revised. So I think that should be the message of this failure, that you cannot create a architecture which will live forever,
Correct.
right? So even human beings are evolving, right? It's evolution, right? So their God created architecture is also evolving all the time. So how can they expect the technical architecture to remain static for a long duration? So it should come with an expiry date.
Yeah. So one point to this, Kumaran, right? I completely agree that it's an architecture failure, but whether the architect is responsible, right? That's where the question comes, right? Because in the freelancing culture, most of the times the architects are pay-per-use kind of a mode they are operating on, right? So there's no in the service company who's they don't have a permanent architect who defines the solution for the customers for a long time, or within the company for a long time, how they want to take up their skill set or capability to the next level. Rather, based on the business request or a project request, they hire a freelancing architect. They come at that particular point of time, try to mix it up, try to provide some solution, and go out. After that, there will be another architect. They will be hired for same project probably 2 years down the line. So there is no continuity. There is no part to it, right? So how do you think that will evolve in the future because of more of the freelancing culture that's getting as a mainstream right now?
If you look at actually the real means, if you say the physical architecture world, right? The real architects, not the software architects, because of course software architects also real, but we are saying the architects in the physical world.
Of course, very real. We are sitting here.
People, what I meant was they create real physical things, right? Not virtual bits, right? So the physical architects, for example, the architect who helped me build my house, right? I still go back to him if I have a problem, right? Because I had some leakage which happened because he did not anticipate something, because the environment outside my house also, because he cannot anticipate everything which happens outside my house. Something changed outside which caused leakage in my house. So I had to call him back. He says, how can we fix this? So I'm still connect. So although he's a freelance, I paid him for that 1 gig, whatever he did, right? I'm not paying him again.
No, I'll put it this way.
Yeah.
So that's, I'll just change the scenario a little bit.
A gig.
You're going to a contractor. You're going to a contractor. Yeah, so you're going to a contractor, and contractor has hired some freelancer for architecture work for you. Assuming like that way, right? You have a contractor in between.
So actually, right? I did the reverse.
You face some problem after 2 years. You go to the contractor again.
So I think maybe
exactly. So that could be one of the model.
The business model, it needs to evolve where you hire the architect instead of the contractor. So the architect.
Raja, I think it's about being in responsibility mode, as I call in Hypercar, right? From an architect's perspective, wherever I am, how can I make a change? Now, what the contractor does is in my circle of influence. It's not in my circle of control. Okay? What the customer does in this scenario, I am there, contractor is there, customer is there, actual customer. Okay. So the actual customer is outside my circle of influence also. Okay. The contractor is in my circle of influence, and what I do is in my circle of control. So what we are talking about, in some case, I could be a part of the contractor, an architect. So I'm telling an architect, assuming I can be a contractor to an architect to a contractor, or I can be an architect as a part of the contractor team itself. Okay. Or I could be an architect with the customer. There are 3 places where I could be an architect. So there is an architecture, architect can be there in everywhere. So what I'm kind of trying to say is, we'll have to look at it how the 3, right? The first one probably, today architects do not own relationships. They don't think it is their job to own a relationship, which is a fundamental problem. They think you come, they are behaving like my manager. Deepak will know, Harish Vaidyanathan. The first thing I joined consulting, he'll say, don't be a chemist, Kumaran. Headache, Saridon, don't do that. Okay? If you're thinking like that, you cannot be an architect. Right? You got to understand, is the headache because of a stomach upset, or is it choking, or are you tired, are you trying from exhaustion? First, you got to get there. You have to understand that. Now you might not get paid for it, but you still have to do it. Like, okay, and there are ways to do that. Like, Raja, if you remember, one of the things that happened is during our program, there was another consultant also from MCS, and one of you guys had invited me for a dinner. You invited both of us. We were there in the room. Okay, I turned up. That guy said he will come. When I saw he didn't come. Okay, and then when I asked him a later date, he said, "You know what? I'm there to go there to share a SharePoint problem. They are having a team dinner. Why should I turn up there?" Okay, I'm being called in for my expertise. I don't see any point in having food with them. That's not a part of the contract. He's right. That's the problem. He's right. Right? It's not in scope. The scope didn't say you should go and have dinner with the customer. Okay. Now, that is needed to build that trust. And that is a place where I can have another conversation on what is large. So, in similarity, like let's take, why do you go to a family doctor? I'll use that analogy. You don't go to the family doctor every single time. You go to them once in a while. But you're confident because they know your antecedents. They know your context. Okay, and good family doctors always have this conversation beyond medicine. What is your son doing? Has he finished this degree? Has he finished that? What are they planning to do? They have that kind of a conversation. Whether that person uses it or not is secondary. But that gives a kind of confidence building, right? So at every level within your circle of influence, the architect is supposed to do that. So let's say the architect is working with the contractor, he needs to breach that wall. He needs to blur that wall. If the architect is with the contractor, they need to do it with the customer. And it works vice versa also. Like let's say I'm an architect at the customer side, I need to breach the wall with the contractor because the contractor considers them as a part of myself. It works the other way also. It is not like, I am telling you what to do, you do it and give. So, and this has to consistently happen. If that happens, right? I'm telling what is in the control of the architect. The architect has to go beyond the scope of work and tell it. And when you keep doing it repeatedly, in this case, what will happen is the contractor will keep coming to the architect again and again. Now, in a 6 month or a 1 year period, the contractor will start having confidence on the architect, and he will say the architect, the freelance architect is working in the interests of my company. Then he will put you in front of the customer because when he is not feeling threatened. Now you have a chance to expose that. So maybe it's a 1 year, 1.5 year journey, which is what in Hypoha, right? We also talk about the tiny grid, consistently doing something for a long time. Architecture cannot be done in a month or 6 months. It takes, the complex the problem, it takes a longer period of time. So it's hard, and I think that time, and it's a balancing between the long-term thing, right? I guess the only key thing is architect cannot see what is my immediate return. It cannot be an instant gratification game, which I think as an engineer I used to struggle with. I still have a problem with sales. I am poor with sales because I have an engineering mindset, which means I have immediate or predictable results. An engineering problem is I know that when I run this algorithm, I'll get a result in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, good or bad. Now, when I enter into a sales, I don't know when the result will come. I don't have the mindset to do that. I have to develop it. Architects have an engineering mindset. That is a problem. They don't have an architectural mindset.
Agreed, Kumaran. So just, I mean, from an architect perspective, I completely agree, right? To your analogy of the family doctor, right? Absolutely, that's exactly the point that we are trying to do. Create when Deepak talked about it, he went into an architect and then tried to get a contractor. So the circle of influence, right? Whether the business has to have a circle of influence with the architect first, even before choosing the contractor to build it, basically. So is that a model that will work much better in the future because of the freelancing kind of a model that is evolving?
Yeah,
I'm talking about the model, how this works.
I don't know how it will evolve. Okay, I think it is, we are talking about the maturity of like taking the therapy. What would be the end user's maturity, right? And today, honestly speaking, I think even the enterprises are not mature enough to understand what architecture is. Now we are talking about
True.
freelancing and consulting architect. Okay. Full paid embedded architecture itself, we are struggling. That is the truth of the industry today. We are very immature as far as
True.
architecture is concerned. Right now, if I can at least acknowledge wherein the key stakeholders, let's say the CEOs, CTOs, understand what architecture is, then we can kind of do. Today, architecture for them is a great Java developer, is a great .NET developer who can write without bugs is an architect. Probably they'll go generous enough to say, if that guy can understand my requirement and meet my needs perfectly, it's a good architect. And unfortunately, that's a very low maturity level. Architecture is much beyond that. It's not just understanding requirement. Now, somebody comes and says, show me an architect like that. Okay, I will be standing there scratching my head because not many architects are there with that capability. So it's a kind of chicken and egg story. I guess what we are trying to do is work through that, right? Build. So what I am doing is at least within the community of architects, right, who claim as architects, who are playing that role, we increase that awareness and we go ahead and say, my dear stakeholder, don't worry, I got your back. In terms of profitability,
Absolutely.
in terms of loss, like that. So in this case, probably it's a little tricky, but if the vendor can tell that services company, I will give you a solution where your revenue will be intact. Can we do that? What do you think? In fact, I have an idea in which your revenue can improve. That will be a hook. The bait. At least you can have a conversation. Maybe the services company won't give you that next deal or that engagement around that, but at least it can be a good height to keep it up. So the services company is telling, let's assume I am the services company. I am telling you, Raja, please develop this AI solution and give. I don't have the in-house capability. Okay. Now you can kind of be an order taker and then say, okay, what are the specifications? Let me develop it and give it to you. But you know it's not ideal. Okay, I'm going to take whatever you give it to my customer, and I am done, and I'm doing what I'm. Now there's a possibility that you can tell me, Kumaran, your revenue is, let's say, X dollars. Okay, I will give you a plan. Not only I'll give you a solution, I would kind of help you build your capability such that you can maintain this solution. Okay, I'm not going to give you a solution alone. I'm also going to give you a training module or a path by which one of your team can learn this and take it over. So in a period of 6 months, one person from your team can manage this solution. And by managing this solution, even though you have given to the customer, you still own that business of maintaining and operating that solution. Second, your team has built this capability, so you can go to another customer and say, I can offer this service. So that is a completely different, you're taking the conversation at a different level to my company. So I can say, now that one customer, you can go to 3 other customers with the same team capacity. You don't have to increase your cost, but you can increase your revenue, but it's a 10-month thing. We will look at it slightly. I'm not telling that the services company will immediately jump and give you the money, but you are elevating the conversation.
Yep.
Now that kind of leads to the thing which I wanted to talk about, right? This is something what an architect only can do, because the project, the CEO of a company has a long-term vision, right? But the moment you come to a project level or a program level, even if you have a 1 month, 1 year vision, like for example, in your case, if you take the program that you run, okay, probably you and your boss have a 3-year, 4-year vision. Okay. But any layer lower or any other people won't have anything like that. Okay. If you have, it is extraordinary. Typically they won't. They will just have what is there in the plan and the immediate goals. That's what they are restricted to. So only you would know 3 years down the line as an architect what is the need that is needed. Okay. Now, architects are the only ones who can anticipate what is going to happen. So, in the case that we said, some architect or somebody playing the architect role inside the services company should have anticipated there will be a need for AI. It is going to become mainstream and start building on that. So, in a 3-year period, they could have easily built that capability. Okay, now it has become so serious that they have to get it done by somebody else. Even now, it looks like they're not preparing for it. They are thinking it's just one-off thing. Let me deal with that, right? As an architect, two challenges, right? How? Now, this is classic in a conventional company. Whose responsibility is this? Anticipating future. Now, this is a HR skill, right? Whose problem is it?
The CTO.
It's the HR problem. They have to skill people for the future. No. They have to recruit the right kind of people.
So that, again, it goes back to the vision statement of the company, right, Kumaran? So the CEO sets the vision statement that makes the HR to work in the direction to create that kind
Correct.
of
But
capabilities, either from
is it
outside
even
or
fair
inside.
to expect the HR to anticipate a technology need?
I think there is more to this. Is more complex than just to blame architecture for it, because I believe that the trust which any services company or any product company has to build with the customer is not it. I'm telling you from personal experience. It's the trust with me is not built by what you're selling me. It is what you are refusing to sell me, even though you know that you will make more money for me from that
Okay, so
business.
I'm sticking to one specific point here.
Yeah.
The architect anticipates the technical needs and skills.
Yes.
How is he going to convince the other stakeholders to invest in it? That is the question. What do you think are the ideas the architect can use to convince it? Because it's like I'm looking at a future skills that is needed. Now, it could be technologies things, it could be soft skills, it could be business skills, whatever it is, right? So, for example, let's say if architect has to understand P&L balance, correct? How am I going to convince my team? What should an architect do? Have any of you seen they doing that well? Because the reason I'm asking this question is unless the architect brings that up, nobody else will. And it will always be you're trying to fight the fire after it has entered the bedroom. Right? It's like go and get somebody at the market. What is going to happen? You're going to pay 3x the resource price for that. It's like constantly you're in ICU for skill set needs. The architect can only anticipate the technical needs, right? What is the mechanism to convince the stakeholders to invest in that? How can an architect do it?
So I think the architect has to explain the reasoning of the architecture instead of right. The architect has to explain why what he is proposing is relevant to the business over the period the architecture will live for, right? And that is how people start making sense for whether I should invest in it or what is the value in the long term.
Can you give an example, Deepa?
For example, let's take the AI example, right? So the example which we are talking about from this beginning, right? So the company built some data entry system which lives in a particular way. The format exists. It has survived for some time, right? Now it is delivering some business process value to the customer, right?
So it's kind of a classical transcription BPO company. I've been doing it for 2 decades now.
Yes.
Successfully.
Yeah. So this is the value they are delivering now.
Correct.
Now it is for the services company to understand the customer's business changes, right? Now what is the customer trying to achieve by implementing AI or any of the other new technologies? It may be just because it is something fancy which their competitors are doing, or it may be some real benefit which they are after, right? Which is says, okay, I can reduce the inaccuracies in the filling of the form. I can make it more intuitive for the person interacting with the customer to get the information quickly. So errors are less. So my user satisfaction goes up, right? Now that is the problem that services company is trying to solve, not to keep the repeat business going on for maintaining that data entry application, right? So if the architect is able to tie these things together, that this is what the customer really needs over a period of time to evolve, they will be expecting increases in efficiency, they'll be expecting reduction in cost not necessarily in terms of what they are paying you, but cost in running their business process, right? So it may be possible for the services company to actually get more money out of the same customer while they are providing this efficiency. If we always assume, I mean, this is probably my mistake, is that everything is remaining static. These are all moving parts, they are evolving individually, and they should be able to anticipate that it is not going to remain static, right? That is why I said, if you're building something, you have to have expiry date. This is not going to live forever. What are the situations where your architecture will stop working? Those assumptions which you have created, how long they can live for, right? That is where the architecture can really add value and explain it when the architecture is initiated, that this is the whatever the statutory warning which this architecture comes with.
So
right?
basically, a kind of tying it to that, right? So basically, the method, if I have to kind of rephrase / summarize, the architect has to put an expiry date of the current working model, and then say, boss, after this, your model or this thing is going to die, and the only way you're going to arrive is keep being alive is these new technical skills or new capabilities we have to invest now. Otherwise, we are going to die. Basically, putting a fear of death.
Yeah, so that's not really fear of death, but it's like you'll be out of sync, right? The moment you are out of sync, you will become irrelevant. It's not fear of
They
death.
have to tell this message to whom? The stakeholders who have to invest in the training.
Yes. So this not just not the stakeholders who are investing in training, but how do you actually position it over a long period of time, because it's not always possible.
No, the specific question here is, how do I convince the stakeholders to invest in that training or build that skill?
So obviously customer is not interested. Obviously customer is not interested.
Yeah. So I'll just add a point, right? So I just have a point, right? So I remember 15 years back, right, in Ameriprise, there used to be an organization below CTO with the combination of architects, the financial people, and the training people, whoever comes, right. There is a small organization which defines a strategy for the company under CTO. They won't be under any of the businesses. Actually, they directly work for the CTO company. So that model,
what they call that group?
It's called it's a CTO group. They call it as a CTO group itself. So they support the CTO to take decisions.
Is that?
No, it's a full-time group. It's a full-time group.
Okay. So they have.
Yeah, they work specifically.
In that. What is the skills?
Architect. So I was part of the architecture. I was part of the architecture team, and there used to be the financial people. There used to be HR. There used to be a training and development. Okay, folks. So who are the representatives of that? Who defines everybody's input is given to CTO to take the strategic decision for the company, and then that is percolated to all businesses across the organization. So but that model, I haven't seen that model in other ones.
That's very interesting. Is that
it's kind of a board?
That's what I'm asking. So is it? So that means that people are not full time in that. I'm getting into the details here, Rajan, because usually the concept a lot of people have. So I'm trying to get to the actual thing which something can be done. So is it a board, which means the HR guy will probably spend something like 5 hours in a month?
No. Okay. It's not a management board. It's not a management board. This team specifically works for CTO, and whatever the input they give, that will be taken to the board.
So this is a team which works full time on this only.
full time with the CTO, under CTO, directly under
So
CTO.
I'm kind of curious. So let's say there is a HR guy who's full time under the CTO, right? 40 hours in a week. What is he going to do for strategy? Or a finance guy?
He wa- so he okay. So they defines a strategy, and then they go back to each of the businesses and try to explain the strategy and vision. So their thing is how to communicate this vision to the top, to the bottom.
So essentially, it's a kind of, if I have to say, they are, even though it's a HR person or a finance person, they are actually doing an architecture work. It is anticipating the
Kind of.
needs and doing the evangelization, convincing the customer. So they might not be called architects, but they are actually improving the
Yeah,
skills
they are
of the
domain
architecture.
experts.
So,
Yeah,
so
domain SMEs probably. Yeah.
So I'll give you one example of one of the companies we were trying to help them set up a new organization, right? So this is a brand new IT organization where whole organization structure we are creating and roles we are defining, right? Each role has to have roles and responsibilities. So this is, of course, this is an HR kind of a job, but we are talking about IT roles and responsibilities, right? Now, what needs to be defined for each role is how do you call that this role is successful, right? So there has to be guidance for everybody who's playing that role to understand what does success look like for my role, right? Now, who defines that success, right? Obviously it has to be an organizational design question, right? And it has to be tied eventually to somehow the business objectives, right? Because if the company is moving towards AI and people are developing COBOL programs, obviously they are going in different directions, right? So there has to be sort of an institutional mechanism within organizations who define the success of each role, right? Now architects can contribute to it, right? So architects can contribute to specific roles. They cannot contribute to all roles, but they can contribute to the technical depth of knowledge which certain roles require and how those roles will evolve over a period of time. Simple things like what training do I provide to my development team in this business unit, right? Maybe that business unit is dedicated to a specific industry solution, right? So what that is where the architect can contribute. It says, okay, this year we need to invest in making sure that the business looks like this. The development skills we need are going to come from these. This is what we develop. So this is not necessarily a pure architecture question, but architectures can contribute. So I would not hold them solely responsible for it, but they have to give the direction to the people who are designing these trainings and people who are.
I completely see. When I say architecture is responsible, right? It's not about architect. Okay, the other thing
is a key input.
Architect cannot own anything fully because he is a person who has responsibility.
No, actually, he can own fully. He can own fully because it depends on how the organization does. One of the ways we suggested to the company was that you have what we call as a role owner, right? Where somebody owns that role, right? And that could be an architect, right? It says, I own whatever this role is going to be successful with. I will design their trainings. I will do whatever. So this is a virtual thing, right? This is, you don't have to keep on doing it, but you have to invest time in doing it. You have to recognize the effort being done by that person, right? Because finally all organizations have to have some way of rewarding the effort you're putting in, because if you're putting all this effort on the architect, there has to be some reward for doing that activity, right?
No, so the point is this.
Yes.
In your example, the development plan for every role, the architect has to do it. For example, like let's say it's a BPO, it's a bank. Okay, so let's say there's a bank. There is a clerk there, okay, or a upper division clerk or a senior. Now, in that development plan, I have to go and add UiPath or Power Automate. Now, I am going to change what the clerk sitting in the branch is going to do as an architect. because
No,
they
no, no,
need
no,
to
no,
do
no.
their own automation.
No, no, no. So this is not the model which I suggested to the customer. This is what we suggested to them was each role should have a role owner. Now that who that role owner is a
No,
it may be,
okay.
for
So my
example,
question is then
in your example, it
I
is
have to
a,
change my question.
yeah,
The architect. So basically, the need is everybody in the bank should know the RPA tool, even if he's a
yes,
clerk.
yes.
How will the
So the
architect convince
architect,
them?
so the architect has to talk to the role owner, right? So this is the model which we suggested. It says the role owner could be an experienced clerk who knows that job very well, right? He understands what the skills are required for that clerk's job, right?
Okay.
Right? That is so. That is the influence the architect can do and say, okay, now I understand this clerk role is going to change. As an architect, I know. Now
Okay.
I cannot go and talk to every clerk who is there in the bank. Now how do I influence the training and the readiness or whatever else that needs to happen for that clerk? I need to go and talk to the role owner and say, okay, in your job we expect that this they should be knowing these things. Now the role owner can fight back. He says, okay, I don't agree, this is not the
Yeah.
role we are hired to do, right? That is where the influence can happen.
So I think it's kind of I'm just summarize so that also I would Nishan, you can I look forward to your input also what you have seen. So I'm just kind of trying to summarize and make a note, right? I'm just trying to get the key point. I think in Raja's case, he shared an example of a full-time board, right, which exists on. So they not only envision, they also evangelize on what's happening, right? So it's not just they kind of do both envision, execute, and evangelize, right? So they kind of see how much the different business teams are implementing it, check that. So that's why it's a full-time job there. In your case, it is like uh, liaison slash, like let's say evangelize, right? It's probably like envision slash evangelize with role owners. That's the approach that you're taking. So basically you kind of now the role, it could be a technical role owner, it can be a project manager role owner. So it's kind of what you're telling is the model in which identify the role owners and the architects actually kind of go and convince them of the newer upskilling or things that they need to do. Okay, I think I that's both are two beautiful different approaches to things. Nishant, what's your thoughts on how can the architect influence in enhancing the tech skills of the organization itself, right? Let's not just, of course, the immediate thing that we typically see is what skills a developer needs. And to avoid that scenario where suddenly in an emergency you're recruiting 3 guys and you will pay them double the market, which means instead of having 5 developers, you can have only 2 developers, and everybody is in trouble. The architect is in trouble, the customer is in trouble because 4 people's work, 2 people are trying to do.
Yeah, basically, in my view, the first thing is like the actors should be able to talk this. They should actually use the terminologies to more align to business terms. Like because nowadays the main problem, I think, this is one point that is highlighted by either Deepak or Raja. I think the one main problem is like when we talk about solutions, we always try to explain it from a pure technical point of view, even to business users, because that is the basic language that we learned, and we always have a tendency to reproduce that in any forums. So the first thing is like we should actually realize the actual business problem and find the solution from a technical point of view, and that will be mainly behind the scene, but we should articulate that to in a more business angle to the end user. And we should and more important thing, actually we should have maximum the same thing you have in this hypograph, the CQA thing. The CQA thing, like we should have the maximum set of queries and as much queries we can ask to that intermediate person or the end user to really understand their actual problems and then articulate a solution which should solve their problem and which should solve their immediate problem, and a solution which would give them more value from a future point of view.
Okay, what you're telling is when they are talking about a problem, you kind of also embed the skills need for that. That is one way in which you can influence. You tell that's another way to get. How do I inspire them to make an investment into a skill building exercise, technical skill building exercise? Now it could be like, see, they kind of see the challenge, I guess, is that right? Learning is always an afterthought, unfortunately.
Yeah, correct. True.
Okay, and it's something like okay, I don't GPT-3. Who really cares about GPT-3? Right? Nobody does, and
Yeah.
lot of companies will not even. I mean, there would be tech teams who are not even aware of a terminology called GPT-3. But now, if somebody starts learning about GPT-3 today, in a 1.5 year period, if they consistently learn that, they will be able to use it. But 3 years down the line, probably will be GPT-6, which comes mainstream, and you'll be so much behind the curve that you'll pay a premium to get that resource. So, how do I convince somebody today to invest that $2 into learning so that 3 years later they don't have to spend $2,000 for the same skills? Now, even if they spend $2 every month for the next 3 years, it will be significantly lesser than the $2,000 they're going to spend 3 years later.
I think this comes back to our one of the episodes we did on learning organization, right?
Yeah.
So how do we create that learning culture? All right. So if we are going to sustain this thing, we are going to keep evolving. If you create the learning culture, then it is part of the revenue expenditure, right? If you are going to do point in time training, it is going to be part of capital expenditure, right? So I'm just it's not real financial terms, but I'm just making it look like that,
Yeah.
right? Because you'll have to spend bulk of money at that point of time, right? So that is where you have to start thinking about it, because that whole $2 approach is the learning organization, right? Because this is what we do every day. This is not something, this is part of our regular expense. So this is not something, it's like buying Netflix, right? Because now you watch it every day, you pay it monthly, right? So otherwise, if you do pay it once a year, then you might think about it and say,
It's
okay.
kind of interesting. Let me just make that known. Like, learning expense should be a part of OPEX and not CAPEX. In a way of speaking, it's not a one-time thing. It's a regular thing that I will be
I'm
spending.
sure this is probably financially inaccurate, right? Because this is probably how now they classify it, but this should be a reoccurring expense. That, let's say it like that.
Yeah, I would actually go ahead and say the architect should be capable of defining, getting this under a OPEX model, because it's in like 3 months.
No, I you're correct.
Yeah.
It started happening, I believe, honestly.
Okay. That we are
Yeah.
spending.
So because initially the learning was associated with the project, right? This project needs this skills and then learn. I think that model is going out. Now it's mostly about, because the fear of death that you mentioned, right, Kumar? And I think it's just coming up every time, actually, in most of the meetings, right? So I think this is now coming as part of the OPEX.
We should call it fear of obsolescence, because death seems very scary these days. So, so let's call it fear of obsolescence.
Fear of obsolescence, yeah. That's true.
Yeah, and Akwana, just one point regarding this learning. Actually, I was trying to relate how it differs from a service and product company. Like, because in a product company, at least we have a clarity, to an extent, we have clarity on our roadmaps for down the line, say 2 to 3 years, and probably the learning, everything can be aligned to that based on that roadmap. And how this would differ in a service company, because service company is like more volatile. Like, we have next next month we will start another project, and the
Domain, skills, everything changes.
Everything keep on changing. So the learning also is somewhat aligned to the dynamics of that service company, right? The dynamicity or the changing factor of that service company. But it is, but in the product company, it has a bit more control on the learning. I mean, if we have a
So it's, yeah, I think Deepak is saying no, but Nishant, I will talk for on Nishant's side, Deepak. Okay,
Yeah.
there's a fair argument in that, right? Like for example, 5 years back, if we said you, or let's say even 6 years ago, when we joined Microsoft, right? Somebody said, we're going to have core people working on Linux core. We would have said, what the hell? This is Microsoft, correct? But today it's not true. You have many Unix specialists working there. So that is, from that perspective, even product companies cannot anticipate. But typical services companies, it's so hard that today I get a banking customer on Python.
Yeah.
I'm saying, okay. Tomorrow, next project, I will get it from somebody in retail who will say, do it on Java. I'll say, okay, boss, as long as I can bill, I will take it. So it's a genuine challenge.
I get the challenge. All I wanted to say by shaking my head was that that product companies are also services companies now, because
yeah, that's true.
right, because nobody's, I mean, at least in the IT world, everybody is selling only services. They are no longer selling products.
Correct. That's true. That's kind of very true. And it's kind of interesting that discussion is kind of getting murky, right? I think we discussed some time back. Maybe we can go back. These are never ending topics. But I think Nishant's question, right? If it is changing, I think then at least the organization should basically, it's up to the architect, kind of see what is the core thing. So maybe it needs to focus on technology agnostic skills, which you keep building on that. So for example, if you understand what GPT-3 is, or what are the different machine learning models, right? That will still be useful regardless of whether you are going to use that we know that AI is going to be there everywhere. Okay. So then when a customer comes, I can use that skill. But if I'm going to say that I'm working on APA, suddenly I'm going to get a RPA project. Yes, then it's a different kind of a thing. So then you go back to an even more basical thing like, am I good in debugging? Can the architect find out a program where problem solving skills? But I think it depends on how much of variability is there. So the more variability is there, architect has to find an even more common denominator. But if we say we will pick up projects only in the Java area, for example, then you could have trainings around that. And we can see within Java how I can go to API, let's say AI or the next level like that. So I think that's where the architect's job is important. He has to see the context of the organization and the roadmap and the business that they are. It's no universal learning path or skill.
Yeah, I understand.
But one thing, one more dimension that's getting added, right, Kumaran, is about the people analytics. If from a people capability enhancement perspective, right? Okay. So how exactly the people are working today in the organization, how to collect that information and try to identify or categorize them into different motivation factors, different areas they work on, and different aspirations they work on, something like that.
Well, that's a
so that's becoming
that's an important one.
So basically, to understand what you're telling, Raja, is the architect to kind of understand not just the business but also how the different people in the organization, what are they doing, what is their work, what will make them. It's kind of similar to what Deepak was telling. Similar is that what does that success of that person is, what would be their challenges.
Correct.
How can they be successful, and what does their success look like, and to make them look successful in the long term, what is the technology that they would be needed. It's like you're going through that ownership to understand this. So I guess, is that what you mean by people analytics?
That's right actually. And this term actually gets gone by I think Google Laszlo. He's a chief people officer or that title. Okay, so that was like really popular for last couple of years, like 4-5 years.
I think it's kind of remote or kind of slightly connected to the persona we define, right? What is the person? In typical architecture, we define a persona, right? It's similar to, it's just probably persona is step one of doing this analytics, right?
Role is a persona. Role is a persona here.
Yeah.
So in that persona, you will probably have one attribute called tech skills needed, and that box the architect has to fill.
Exactly. Yeah, so the role is what they play today, but the persona is about that particular person because he plays that role. He can be a contributor on something. He could be involved in external work groups. So the persona defines
I
the
get it.
holistic of what that person is actually.
I get it. I get it. Yeah.
It's great. I think that's a
Great.
lovely
Yeah.
point. Okay, so great discussion. I initially we were off all over the place, but that's okay. That's what architecture is. Uh, Only thing I guess I think
Yeah.
hopefully we kind of come back to that point, right? And as I was telling the joke, right? Architecture is like air, right? It kind of permeates everything, right? And you can't really say. But then if you look at it, you are eating only food and drinking coffee, but air is a key contributor to that. So you take coffee and say, where is the air there? It's hard to show it.
But I think means maybe our contribution to that has to be to sort of make it more specific and give guidance to people as to what they are expected to do, right?
And I think I think that's a challenge. I think I just told that by mistake, but I think that air seems to be a good metaphor, right? Because it's hard for air to justify. I am the reason you are having good coffee. I am the reason you are able to drive a BMW.
No, I'm saying the reverse of what you are saying. I'm saying
Oh, is it?
let
Okay.
us demystify it and not sort of make it impossible for people to
Okay.
get it that what it really is. If we start saying it is air and air is everywhere and everybody has to breathe it, and sort of people will start confusing that it is difficult to understand, right? So I think our contribution should be to make it simpler for people to understand what it is and what it is not. Maybe we should.
We should kind of say, maybe in the analogy which I said, the smell of the coffee is architecture. The combustion engine efficiency is architecture, like that.
Yeah, maybe we should be easy to identify. Means it should not be so mystical that people
Ah.
find it difficult to answer. This is architecture. So my favorite way of doing something is first define what it is not, right? What let people understand what it is not. Definitely this is not, right? So then you can, it is easier to narrow what it is actually, right? So that is how my brain works on simplifying stuff rather than that is my approach instead of to let people get clarity then fogginess. That's what
Great discussion. I think thanks all for joining. It was a good discussion.